Episode 9. Why do you feel guilty for setting boundaries when protecting your peace somehow feels selfish? You finally did it. You set the boundary. You declined the invitation. You stopped answering work messages at 10 p.m. You told someone, I'm not able to do that. You didn't take responsibility for an emergency that wasn't yours to solve. And then, instead of feeling empowered, peaceful, and emotionally liberated, you felt terrible. Now you're replaying the conversation. Was I too harsh? Should I text them? Maybe I should explain myself again. Maybe I'll write a 7-paragraph dissertation with citations explaining why I couldn't attend brunch. If you have ever set a completely reasonable boundary and then immediately wanted to take it back because guilt showed up, today's episode is for you. Welcome to Anchored Thoughts, where we navigate life storms together, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Toni, a board-certified psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, recording from my floating yacht where my husband and I travel America's Great Loop. In episode 8, we talked about why people-pleasing makes it difficult to say no. Today, we're talking about what happens after you say it when the boundary is set, but your emotions haven't caught up with your decision. Boundaries have become one of those psychological terms we use constantly, sometimes without being clear about what they mean. A boundary is not, you have to behave exactly the way I want. A boundary will communicate what you will do, allow, participate in, or accept responsibility for. I want you to compare these statements. You're not allowed to yell at me with, if your yelling begins, I am going to end the conversation and we can try again when we're both calmer. The first statement attempts to control the other person. The second explains how you will respond. That distinction matters because boundaries are not primarily about controlling someone else's behavior. They are about clarifying your participation. You cannot always stop someone from yelling, criticizing, demanding, or repeatedly calling, but you can decide whether you remain in the conversation, answer a request, or continue participating in the same pattern. We often assume that if a decision remains bad, it must have been a bad decision. But emotions don't always tell us whether something is right or wrong. Sometimes they tell us that something is new. If you have spent years being endlessly available, having a limit may seem selfish. If you have spent years avoiding conflict, assertiveness may feel aggressive. If you have spent years taking care of everyone else, choosing yourself may feel irresponsible. And if you've built relationships around being the person who always says yes, changing the pattern may feel as if you're changing the relationship. But in some ways you are. Changing an unhealthy pattern is not the same as harming someone, though. This is the distinction I want you to remember. Discomfort is not the same thing as wrongdoing. A new boundary may feel uncomfortable because your nervous system prefers familiar patterns, even when those patterns are exhausting. Your brain may be saying, go back, this is unfamiliar. That does not necessarily mean, go back, this is wrong. Those are two different types of guilt. When guilt appears, it helps to understand what it may be trying to communicate. One useful distinction is between appropriate guilt and conditioned guilt. Appropriate guilt occurs when you act against your values. Maybe you were intentionally cruel. Maybe you lied. Maybe you broke a promise without taking responsibility. And maybe you communicated your limit in a disrespectful way. That kind of guilt can be helpful because it encourages reflection, accountability, and repair. But conditioned guilt is different. Conditioned guilt may appear when you haven't actually done anything wrong. You have simply done something that an older version of you was not accustomed to doing. For example, you rested instead of rescuing. You said no instead of automatically agreeing. You allowed an adult to solve their own problem. Does that sound familiar, parents out there? Or you chose not to sacrifice your well-being to prevent someone else from feeling disappointed. Conditioned guilt doesn't always mean you need to repair something. Sometimes it simply means you are stepping outside of an old role. Here's a question worth remembering. Is this guilt asking me to repair my behavior or return to my old position? Those are not the same thing. Some guilt says you acted outside of your values. Take responsibility. Other guilt says someone is unhappy. Hurry up and abandon yourself so everything else can feel familiar again. Learning to tell the difference is a part of developing healthier boundaries. Sometimes the feeling underneath boundary guilt is grief. You may be grieving the version of a relationship in which you kept the peace by carrying more than your share. You may be grieving your identity as the person who always fix everything. You may even be grieving the belief that if you were helpful enough, agreeable enough, or available enough, nobody would ever become upset with you. Setting a boundary can reveal that some relationships benefited from you not having one. That realization can hurt, but it does not automatically mean the relationship must end. Sometimes people are simply surprised because the usual pattern has changed. They may need clarification. There may be room for conversation or compromise. And healthy relationships can adjust. But adjustment is different from you immediately abandoning the boundary because someone reacted to it. You can listen to another person's feelings without making those feelings the sole authority over your decision. So here's today's try this. It's called repair or remain. When guilt appears after you set a boundary, resist the urge to immediately reverse your decision. Instead, pause and ask yourself 3 questions. Question number 1, did I communicate the boundary respectfully? You are allowed to be direct, but directness does not require cruelty. If you insulted, threatened, or shamed, deliberately embarrassed someone, the issue may not be the boundary itself. The issue may be how you delivered it. You can apologize for the delivery without withdrawing the limit. For example, I'm sorry for how sharply I said that. I should have communicated more respectfully. My decision, however, hasn't changed. An apology does not have to erase the boundary. Here's question number 2. Did I violate one of my values? For example, ask yourself, did I lie? Did I betray trust, behave unfairly, or avoid a responsibility that genuinely belongs to me? If the answer is yes, there may be something to address. However, if you acted honestly, respectfully, and within your values, the presence of guilt alone does not mean that you did something wrong. Here's question number 3. Is there something to repair, or am I simply uncomfortable? If you caused harm, make the repair. Acknowledge it. Apologize. Clarify your intention. Change your behavior if necessary. But if you communicated respectfully and acted consistently with your values, your job may be to remain. Remain with the boundary. Remain with the temporary discomfort. Remain grounded while another person adjusts. Think of guilt like hearing an alarm on a boat. You go and you check it. You determine what it's telling you. But you do not immediately abandon the ship every time something beeps. Sometimes the alarm identifies a genuine problem. And sometimes somebody leaned against the wrong button. It happens. Investigate the emotion before obeying it. Use the friend test. Here's one more question that can help. Ask yourself, if someone I love set this exact boundary with me, would I believe they were a bad person? If your best friend said, I'm exhausted, I cannot come tonight, would you respond, wow, your need for sleep has destroyed everything I thought I knew about you? Probably not. You might feel disappointed, but you could still respect the decision. So why does your brain treat your own limits as evidence of a serious character flaw? Offer yourself the same fairness you would offer someone you love. So here's today's anchor thought. Boundary guilt may be the emotional cost of changing an old pattern, not proof that your boundary is wrong. You can be kind and still have limits. You can love someone and decline a request. You can be supportive without being endlessly available. You can apologize for how you communicated without apologizing for having needs. And you can allow someone to feel disappointed without treating their disappointment as an emergency you must solve. A boundary is not necessarily a wall around your life. Think of it more like the railings on a boat. The railings do not keep us from enjoying the water. They help us enjoy it without falling overboard. So when guilt appears after you protect a reasonable limit, pause and ask, do I need to repair or do I need to remain? I'm your host, Dr. Toni, and this was Anchored Thoughts, where we navigate life storms together, one conversation at a time. This week, I want you to remember not every uncomfortable feeling requires you to change your course. Sometimes it means you're finally steering differently. Until next time, I'll see you out there on the water.